Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the All About Aristotle podcast. Today, we will narrate a brief account of Greek history, ranging from where we left off in the previous installment, right after the Bronze Age collapse until the Greco-Persian Wars. First off, we should enunciate our goals. Keeping in mind that this is a primarily philosophical podcast, we must both keep in mind the necessity of investigating the historical context of the thinkers which we shall be exploring, and we should keep in mind that this historical account is something that must be confined and relatively hurried, given as an auxiliary topic, conducive to a different goal. So, while history is a distinct science from philosophy, we need to be conversant with it so that the context isn't lost on us. After all, philosophers are humans and are subject to the same material conditions which affect us. Moving on, we are now ready to introduce the narrative, beginning with the Greek Dark Ages. Where we left off from the last episode, we saw that the Bronze Age collapse destroyed the Mycenaean civilization, which in turn shifted the Greeks from thriving in palace-based opulence to a backwater region struggling to keep up with new Iron Age innovations. Cities were abandoned, palaces were leveled, and famine is speculated to have depopulated the region. The script produced by the Mycenaeans, that is a syllabic text, labeled by modern historians Linear B, fell into widespread disuse. It wouldn't be until the 9th century BC that Greeks would introduce a new alphabet. Dark Age pottery was noticeably less complex than it was during the Mycenaean Age, with most patterns being bare and primitive. Monumental stone buildings were no longer being constructed, and the economy was in shambles. Organized statecraft degenerated into a world of petty farm owners and serfs. Around the first half of the 8th century BC, however, literacy came back into blossom, and their cultural resurgence gifted us with history's most notable and quoted poet, Homer. Homer needs no introduction, partly because of his immense notoriety, and partly because there is hardly an introduction one could give him. Essentially nothing is known about him, and some historians even doubted his existence, positing instead, however, that the person of Homer should instead be viewed as a school of poets who versified myths prevalent in Greek Anatolia. One thing which we do know is that the poetry which Homer composed did not take place during his time. Rather, given the prevalence of chariots and palaces, it can be inferred that the stories take place sometime during the Mycenaean period. The debate regarding the supposed personhood of Homer, however, is irrelevant to the object of our podcast. Therefore, we will ignore this issue. Instead, we will focus upon the wider scope of what historians label the period which began with Homer, that is the Greek Archaic Age. There is much more to note regarding the Archaic Age as opposed to the Dark Age, given that it isn't, well, a Dark Age. Around the 8th century, the Greek peoples began to form what was then termed a polis, translated nowadays as a city, or if we wish to be more specific, we will label these communities city-states. Indeed, during this era, not only were the Greeks beginning to form tight-knit communities at home, but also abroad. The Greek peoples began to populate portions of southern Italy, Sicily, and even northern Africa. To found a city was to become a man of great repute. These adventures were official, and the man who founded the city became a subject of much admiration, being remembered throughout time through various festivals. Around this time as well, the Greeks began to have sex with local women, which resulted in a plethora of heterogeneous societies across the Hellenic world. Generally, the heads of these colonies would retain gregarious relations with their former city-states, and correspondence was undertaken regularly. Although rare, Greeks would at times drive out the locals from their homes in order to ensure that the societies they founded would retain a Greek socio-religious identity. With an increase in trading, luxury returned to Greece. Various goods from the Black Sea and northern Italy began to be shipped to mainland Greece from their colonies, which reinvigorated the long-dead Greek trade economy. Indeed, around this period, the definitive rule of the aristocracy was cemented. To be an aristocrat not only obliged one into a host of responsibilities, including, in coastal cities, the upkeep of naval vessels, it also came with great pomp and affectation. During this period, being a nobleman also included being a world-class warrior, typically donning imposing regalia and sporting a war horse. In general, while the allocation of power to aristocracy was an invaluable function of the city-state, the practice of kingship generally, wherein one aristocratic family would retain executive power via monarchical inheritance, was out of favor. One notable exception to this, however, was Sparta. Sparta retained a state maintained by two kings. Spartan full citizens, known as Spartiates, would be prohibited from working. This begs the question of how any labor was completed in order to sustain the Spartan people. The answer is, of course, slavery. Very few individuals ever reach the level of full citizenry. In order to obtain it, one must first and foremost, of course, be a man. Spartiates would be trained for grueling battle, and, of course, it goes without saying that the quality of the Spartan army was unprecedented. Even though Spartans could hardly ever host a sizable defense force, the renown of the few Spartiate warriors enabled the city-state to basically never be attacked. The Spartans were famous for being men of few words, instead prizing a concise and vivid lexicon. The vast majority of the Spartan population were slaves, which gave the Spartan regime constant anxiety of slave uprising. Women were given a great deal of power in Sparta, frequently inheriting massive sums of money from dead husbands, who frequently perished in warfare. Overseeing the two kings were the demos, or a body of elderly men. This council would appoint legislation to be reviewed by the people, who would vote yea or nay to the ordinances proposed by the council. The people were composed entirely of male, full Spartan citizens, who would make the final decision regarding any form of ratification. The Spartans seldom recorded the happenings of their state, making this a topic which has mystified academics all the way from the time of Aristotle. So, it would be fair to say that Sparta actually implemented a citizen body far before Athens ever did. The rest of Greece, during the 7th century BC, a great shift began. The general attitude towards aristocracy declined, and instead, a growing regional inclination toward tyranny became widespread. We won't begin an in-depth discussion as to the cause of this age of revolutions, but is generally pinned on a shift in military organization, from tactics that prioritized group cohesion of advanced troops into ones that necessitated the use of individual leaders. Due to this, factionalization became widespread with support from various land-owning families. Tyrants slowly began to form from this intense factionalization and would take advantage of the chaos through coups. From the beginning, most Greeks found the concept of tyranny distasteful. While it may have aided with social cohesion, it was not ideal, with most Greeks finding it offensive and illegitimate. Foreseeing the chaos, some cities reacted quickly, before tyranny could take advantage of a tumultuous state. The most notable example of this was the famous Draco of Athens. Draco was a legislator whose harsh legal system, codified in the late 7th century, would flourish within Athens until the reforms of Solon. 6 magistrates were appointed by Draco in order to record the laws, and it was said that the laws were recorded in blood rather than in ink. Draco's solution for criminal offenses? Death. Which criminal offenses did Draco find death-worthy? Basically all of them. While this was one way to prevent a tyrant, it was, for obvious reasons, not ideal. In the 6th century BC, the aforementioned Solon came along and reformed the system which Draco instituted. Solon was one of the 7 wise men of ancient Greece, essentially, and annihilated any remaining aristocratic elements of the government, while also preventing the rise of tyranny. Conversant with philosophy and a notable poet, Solon would be referred to as the founder of the Athens as we know it. Solon was born upper middle class, possibly a merchant, and began to grow in prominence due to his poetic skill. He began his political career as the annual chief ruler in 594 BC, and immediately freed all enslaved citizens, as well as worked on reducing the national debt. Solon's political reforms were innumerable. He instituted a census of annual income and divided the population into 4 social classes, and, accordingly, he based all requirements based upon one's class rather than one's birth. All except the extremely poor were allowed to serve on the Council of 400, a democratic assembly. Solon, finally, repealed the plethora of death penalties instituted by Draco, retaining it only for homicide. His new code of law remained the principal system of governance in Athens until the 400s BC. Solon, sadly, garnered hate from the conservative upper class and from the liberal lower classes. His happy medium, while it garnered some animosity in his time, was proven by history to be an efficient form of governance. In the next episode, we will pick up from where we left off and investigate the Persian War, Peloponnesian War, and the rise of the Macedonians.